Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar organized in the framework of the Cooling Down project, which is a live project. And the topic of the webinar is renewable cooling to answer climate and energy challenges. I'm Isabella Nardini, working at Fraunhofer IEG, which is the Institute of Energy Infrastructures and Geothermal Systems, Fraunhofer in Germany. And I'm a manager of international affairs, transfer and strategy development. So let's start to talk about cooling. When we talk about cooling, it also has to deal with the concept of modern energy access and just energy transitions. So modern energy access is related to affordability, reliability of the resources, but also on sustainability, meaning social, health, and economic aspect. Just energy transition refers to the process of shifting from fossil fuel-based energy system to a more sustainable, low-carbon energy infrastructures in a way that is equitable and inclusive. So both these concepts recognize that the transition to renewable and clean energy sources have a significant and social economic implication, particularly for communities that are dependent on fossil fuels industry or face energy poverty. So we all know that Europe's temperatures are rising more than twice as fast as the global average, leading to a more frequent heat waves, and this is an issue. So the heating and cooling sector represent nearly 50% of the final energy use in the European Union, and about 80% of Europe's building energy needs are for heating and cooling. In the service sector, for example, commercial building, offices, about 20% of the energy is dedicated to cooling. So it's evident that in Europe, the demand for sustainable cooling and renewable cooling is growing, as is set to grow exponentially in the upcoming decades. So the cooling is really emerging as a crucial sector for climate, energy, economic, employment, and social policies. However, it remains a poorly understood sector by policymakers, and this is, of course, a barrier to the development of a European cooling industry and the deployment of solutions aligned with the EU climate goals. So when we talk about cooling, it's not only about housing, but also cities, industries. And when we talk about energy, we are not only talking about energy efficiency, but also about the cost of electricity grid infrastructures. And with the cooling technologies, we can contribute to this. The multi-stakeholder perspective and involvements are needed. So not only about researchers, industry, policymakers, multi-stakeholder approaches is needed. Now let's come to the Cooling Down project. The project is a live project. It's led by EGEC, which is the European Geothermal Energy Council, based in Brussels. 11 partners from Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Romania, and Spain. And this project aims to develop a vision for a renewable cooling sector in Europe. We focus on geothermal and solar, offering policy recommendations in order to achieve this vision for the cooling sector. This project provides not only technological, economical, and social assessment, but also policy recommendation. And a list of case studies has been identified to understand this dynamic and possibly to scale it up and to replicate. I think we can now start with this introduction. We can now start with the three speakers. They all are actively involved in the Cooling Down project. So I would like to introduce the first speaker. He's Saverio Papa from Solar Heat Europe. Saverio Papa is Policy and Project Officer at Solar Heat Europe, which is the association representing the European solar thermal industry in Brussels. As a background, he owns a bachelor degree in international relationship and a master degree in European studies. So please, Saverio, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Isabella. Yes, I will share my screen. Let me know if it works. Can you see it properly?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So, yes, thank you for the introduction. My presentation will focus on the policy context and the policy needs to advance renewable cooling in Europe. So, starting with the cooling demand, I will just quickly complement what Isabella has already started presenting. So, basically, cooling demand in Europe is growing and is on the rise. It's true that in the heating and cooling sector, we often mention that heating and cooling represents half of the EU energy consumption, and heating is the lion's share in this demand. But it's also true that, for example, cooling degree days have almost tripled in the period from 1979 to 2021, while in the same period, for example, heating degree days have slightly decreased. At this stage, cooling demand is still relatively low. It's only 4% of the final EU energy demand, but it's also true that this has high regional variations. For example, in 2019, in the residential buildings in Malta and Cyprus, this was already more than 10% of the final consumption, which is also a staggering figure compared to the average for EU 27 countries, which was only 0.4%. So in this context, it's nice to see that policymakers start to recognize the role of cooling and the necessity to put in place necessary measures and policy initiatives to address the decarbonization of heating and cooling. Just a few words on the EU's climate framework for 2030. You may be familiar with it, but basically in July 2021, the EU climate law was adopted, and this sets a legally binding target to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, as well as an intermediate target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. As a consequence, the Commission also presented the so-called Fit for 55 package, which is a comprehensive set of proposals to align the EU legislation with this target for 2030. In this context, I will focus on three of the pieces of legislations that were revised with Fit for 55, namely the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Starting with the Renewable Energy Directive, the highlight is that the EU-wide target for renewable energy in 2030 was raised from 32% to 42.5%, with an additional aspirational target of 45%. And the second point was that a binding target for renewable heating and cooling was introduced, together with also some indicative subsectoral targets for renewables in buildings, in district heating, and in industry, which are of course all relevant subsectors when we're talking about heating and cooling. Regarding the target for renewable in heating and cooling, this was already present in the previous version of the Renewable Energy Directive, but it was an indicative target. Hence, many member states didn't feel compelled to set it and to put in place the necessary measures to achieve it. So now it is really critical that this target is now binding. Moving to the EED, the highlight is this new obligation for municipalities with more than 45,000 inhabitants to carry out local heating and cooling plans, which is central since we all know that there is a strong local dimension in heating and cooling, which is also why sometimes EU policymakers and national policymakers struggle or forget about the heating and cooling sector. A second provision, which is also very relevant, is the establishment of new criteria to determine what is an efficient district heating and cooling network, which will basically have to increase the share of renewables and waste heat up to 100% by 2050 to be in line with climate neutrality, or alternatively, they can also refer to the grams of greenhouse gas emissions per kilowatt hour. Lastly, just to mention that there are several measures that also target the data center sector, which is a very cooling intensive sector, and for which, for example, geothermal energy is already a cost efficient and cost competitive source. Last, on the EPBD, member states will have to start drafting national buildings renovation plans every 5 years, which is critical because they will have to provide basically an overview of the measures they plan to implement to decarbonize the building stock. And as Isabella said as well, we know that heating and cooling represents the highest share of energy demand in buildings, and it can count up to 80% of the energy needs of a building. Additionally, member states will also have to set up national databases for the energy performance of buildings. This is critical because it will facilitate the work of local authorities when drafting local heating and cooling plans, but also because it will improve the availability, the accessibility, and also the exchange of data, which is often a bottleneck for the decarbonization of building, but also of heating and cooling, because we often see that we lack data on heating and cooling. Lastly, I will just quickly mention Article 10 of the EPBD, which establishes a so-called European solar mandate that requires buildings to be optimized to generate solar energy, and then to ensure the installation of solar technologies such as solar thermal on specific types of building according to different deadlines. I will conclude this block with our recommendations for 2030. So first of all, we need member states to carry out a timely transposition of these provisions. These are all directives, so they will become effective only when member states transpose the provisions within their national legislations. In this very short presentation, I have only provided like a few examples of provisions, but there are many, many more, and member states must adopt them and transpose them timely. The second priority is that member states also must provide adequate financial, but also technical and staffing resources for the implementation of these provisions. I won't spend any time on the financial needs because it's something that we're all aware of. But we also need to stress the importance of technical expertise and information, and also sufficient workforce. For example, a key provision for us is the one that I mentioned before, the local heating and cooling plans. And local authorities will need technical expertise and, most importantly, staff to ensure that this exercise is a meaningful exercise and not just a tick-the-box exercise, which would be the case if the local authorities do not have the sufficient resources to do it. Last but not least, and we see it with the provisions on the PBD, but also the ED, it will be critical to bridge the data gap because this is often a bottleneck for the decarbonization of heating and cooling. Also preparing this presentation, like I was looking for data on cooling, we're doing it as part of the project Cooling Down. And indeed, it's staggering the difference between the availability of data, for example, on the power sector and the availability of data on heating and cooling, and especially on cooling. So this will be a critical aspect that is already tackled by some of the provisions, but now these provisions must be implemented. And with this, I will then move to the priorities for 2040, which is the next step. In this case, we have identified 3 priorities. The first is the 2040 target. So basically, the climate law requires an intermediate target for 2040, similarly to what it was done for 2030. In February 2024, the Commission recommended a 90% reduction target, but now a legislative proposal must follow, and this target must be enshrined in the climate law. Accordingly, of course, the Commission will also have to adapt the climate framework to achieve the higher target. And in this case, the discussion revolves mostly around the question whether or not to continue the current framework and adapt it, or to basically substantially change it. And for heating and cooling, it is imperative that we maintain the current framework, because it includes several provisions on heating and cooling, as we saw, which took years to be included in the framework, and especially also to guarantee some stability for not only policymakers, but also households, citizens, and businesses, most importantly. The second aspect that we identified, and that was also mentioned by Isabella at the start, is grid congestion and stability. We see this as a growing issue in many European countries. We have the case, for example, of the Netherlands, but also of Southern Europe during the more and more frequent heat waves during the summer. So in 2023, the Commission published an EU action plan for grids, where it is estimated that we will need almost 600 billion euros in investments by 2030 just to modernize and expand the grid. In this case, our request is clear, and it is to recognize the role of geothermal and solar thermal heating and cooling, because they already provide a very cost-effective way to reduce the investment needs and avoid oversizing the power grid. Last but not least, just a few words about the priorities for the new Commission, which took office on the 1st of December. Ursula von der Leyen already highlighted and stressed that affordable energy prices will be at the top of her agenda, because they have a direct impact on many of the priorities for the new Commission, namely industrial competitiveness and housing affordability in Europe, which will be also subject to two dedicated initiatives. One is the Clean Industrial Deal, which is expected by February in the first 100 days of the new Commission, and the other one is the Affordable Housing Action Plan. Also, in this case, we need EU policymakers and national policymakers and local policymakers to recognize that geothermal and solar thermal already offer stable and competitive energy prices for both heating and cooling. And most importantly, they're also EU-made technologies, which also contributes to the competitiveness of the EU clean tech sector. So because of this, we really need dedicated support for these two technologies. Here you also have a summary of what I have just said, so I won't go through it again, but you will find it also in the PowerPoint presentations when we share it after the meeting. You will have the summary of the recommendations for 2030 and 2040. And with this, I think, we can move to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Saverio. I don't know if you have any question, otherwise we pass to the second speakers, and we will have a Q&A session at the end after the three speeches. So I would like to introduce Virginie Schmittler-Bloch from the French Geothermal Association of Professionals. She joined as a background, she joined the ICN Business School in Nancy, where she got her master's degree in management of organization. She has always been working in the energy and environment sector. And since 2011, she has held the position of General Delegate at the French Geothermal Association of Professionals, where she coordinates the association, which is more than 150 companies. And she now masters the technical and the economic issues related to the different sectors covered by the geothermal energy. So she will talk about renewable cooling, its strategic role to reduce costs and externalities. So please, Virginie, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Yes, if we can move to the next slide. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, today my presentation will be organized as follows. I will start with a short introduction, reminding you the context of my presentation, and then I will also take some time to present you the methodology we used to do the analysis, and after that I will go to the main results coming from that study. And I will finish with some wrap-up recommendation to the different stakeholders we have in mind on that topic of cooling, renewable cooling. So, yeah, on the next slide, please. We have a context of this study that is, as we said, the Cooling Down project. And the objective of the work package 4, which was led by the French Association, was to find how to analyze the profitability of cooling solution versus traditional one. So we had in mind to address especially the question of externalities and to see how we can able to integrate them to economic models. So we had different questions in mind and we wanted to solve this one. Is it possible to quantify these externalities linked to the cooling uses? And do these externalities have an impact on the competitiveness of renewable cooling solution? This is really the focus we had in this deliverable. And maybe at this point, I can say that all the results of that study will be available at the end of the project of Cooling Down. So if we come back to the methodology on the next slide, please. Yeah, the first step of the analysis was to see if there was an economic viability of renewable cooling solution and their associated cost-benefit analysis. So first, we decided to consider dense and urban area with delimited administrative borders. But we were not in a capacity to extend our study to big region or to a country. So we keep focused on cities. Then we try to identify the cold demands by identifying all cold needs associated to big families of buildings, such as health establishment, shopping center, residential building. And then to this type of buildings, we lead a cost and benefit analysis by comparing a reference solution to a renewable cooling solution, considering that the solution is efficient enough to satisfy heating and cooling needs. Then, on the next slide, there was a very interesting study done by the AFPG, which is called Study of Geothermal Energy in Air Conditioning and Cooling. This is available on the French website, and we found very nice study in Austria, for example, where we could base on our work. So we had a focus on urban heat islands. In fact, density of construction, human activities, and heating coming from cars, industry, pavement, air conditioning are different factors leading to urban heat islands. So this is a very central theme of the study, and the crystallization of the temperature increasing problematic in dense area. Then we try to have to compare this urban heat island phenomenon in the city and to consider just nearby weather station in less heated area. We also consider that the transition to 100% geothermal energy only erases part of its Iceland effects. Those are indeed not only linked to building cooling needs. One of the philosophy of the study was also to only concentrate on main significant externalities, because we couldn't have a work on every kind of externality, so we only focus on the one which was loss of productivity at work and the increase of mortality. And you will see then in the next slide that this quantification of externalities was added to the cost of the reference solution. We Another solution, another philosophy could have been to diminish the cost of renewable cooling solution. But in a sense, it's like asking a good player to prove he's better than the bad solution. So we wanted better to show that the traditional solution were more expensive when you have to consider the externalities linked to these traditional and fossil solutions. And as I already said, we couldn't focus on a region or on a country. It was too difficult. So we decided to take into account 3 main cities, which were Paris, Roma, and Bucharest. And this is also because we got enough data. As Savario just explained before, it is quite difficult to find appropriate data on cooling. So we had to do with partners who already have some study on that topic, and this is why we focus on Roma, Bucharest, and Paris. On the next slide, I will present the main results. I'm sorry, I won't go into details, but just to explain you the different colors. We have in dark blue the investment cost, in orange the cost of energy for heating and cooling on a period of 25 years. In dark green, we have the cost of the maintenance and the exploitation of the solutions. And then the 2 second color are dedicated to the externalities, the cost of externalities. We have the light blue, which is the over mortality due to traditional cooling solutions. And in purple, we have the loss of productivity. So the first case for Roma, we are in the case of a Mediterranean climate. We have high energy cost and, so to say, an average cost for geothermal solution. But you can see on the 25 years period, we see that the traditional solution is much more expensive than the renewable cooling one. If we go to the next, we got the same kind of application with the different kind of cost. And in the case of Bucharest, where we are in a continental climate with low energy cost, and also low cost of geothermal installation, the difference between traditional solution and cooling and renewable cooling solution are very impressive. So it is 4 times much expensive than the renewable cooling solution. And for the last one, for Paris, the difference is not as evident as for the other case study. Nevertheless, there is still a small difference and in favor of renewable solution. And this is mainly due to the fact that the cost of geothermal installation are supposed to be much higher than in the other country. So maybe we will have to do some work on that topic too. But at the end, we can see there is still a difference and a cost benefit more in advantage of renewable solutions. In my last slides, in the 2 last slides, we have some general comments unsurprisingly, investment costs for efficient geothermal installation are each time significantly higher than for the reference solution. This is something we already knew in the industry, that the cost of geothermal energy are still higher than traditional and in comparison to other renewable solutions. But each time, for each of the case study, we see that the annual savings on a period of 25 years are enough to make the installation profitable. So in each case, we see that on the long run, the installation is competitive to a traditional one. And with the study, with this focus done on the externality, we see that at each time, for each capitals, when we consider the externalities, so the bad consequences on the economy by using fossil solution, we could have saved between 1 and 1.5 billion euros over 25 years, which are significant amount of money, and which also led us to the last slide, where we see the recommendation. It's if we could have done this economics, and we could have expected a better profitability of work, and we could have expected also a diminishing of mortality. This also helped us to consider in a different way the way we have to invest in this solution, this renewable solution that are supposed to be more expensive during the investment phase, but when we see that on the long run it is much more profitable, and at the same time we avoid a lot of qualitative impacts led by the traditional solution. And we hope that with this kind of results, we will be able to support the message we will have to spread around to the different stakeholders of the project, and notably the public bodies that have concretely an interest to support and to contribute to the development of renewable solutions for heating and cooling applications. And this is the last slide. Thank you very much. And if you have any question, please do not hesitate.
Thank you, Virginie. Thank you for your contribution. I see there is one question in the chat. Maybe this was for maybe we can postpone if you do agree after the third speech, and then we can have an open discussion. Okay. Thank you very much, Virginie. So our third speakers. Dr. Yuli Jakob, he's director of the Dr. Jakob Energy Research Gambler & Co. He has more than 25 years of industrial and scientific professional experience in the renewable energy sector and energy efficient technologies. Very scientific background with a diploma in building physics and a PhD in applied thermodynamics. And since 2020, he received an honorary professorship at the Stuttgart University for Applied Science. So thank you very much. Yuli, the floor is yours.
Thanks,
talk
Isabella.
About innovative business model, unlocking new opportunities, renewable cooling. So floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Isabella, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today in this cooling down webinar. To conclude this webinar now with some other aspects coming from the policy, with the best practices now from the calculations we've seen from Virginie, now looking into new opportunities for business models which probably try to help us to overcome all the things which we have to do in the future, especially looking into renewable cooling, sustainable cooling, and to harness this in a way that we really can provide this kind of solutions to the market. And therefore, it's first of all interesting to know where we are coming from, what are the challenges and the opportunities. Secondly, I will just give you a short insight what we have done so far on the collection and analysis of existing business models. And finally, I want to present today a new innovative business model which probably try to help to overcome some of the obstacles which we have seen so far, especially if we want to spread out this kind of renewable technologies and cooling, especially in the near future. So those are the three topics which I want to dive in now, and probably give you a first insight on the work which we are doing here in the Cooling Down project, especially on that kind of topic. Yeah, what's important if you're thinking back about all the numbers you have already seen and heard from the colleagues today, we have several challenges in the cooling sector. And one thing which I really want to stress is if you have a look on the IEA report from 2018, which was looking into the future of cooling in general, not only in Europe, but worldwide, they figured out that especially for space cooling, we will triple the demand on electricity for cooling only between 2016 to 2050 now, by a factor of 3, which means we come up at about 6,000 terawatt hours per year on electricity demand only for cooling worldwide. And the main driver here is the residential sector. And space cooling will, at that time in 2050, just overtake the appliances and plug loads, especially as the single largest user in electricity in buildings. So in 2050, it was 10%. and 2050 it will be about 30%. And the question is now, what the technologies where we are looking now here into the cooling down project, so on geothermal and solar thermal cooling, what can they contribute in these scenarios, that we really have also some benefits from renewable cooling, from sustainable cooling solutions in the future. And one really more important aspect is here really to get into different new financing models, try to establish here things which really help to use also such kind of technologies. Now, what are the business opportunities in that context? So to look into renewable cooling, either with geothermal or solar thermal technologies. If you have a look on the latest publications from UNEP and the World Bank IFC, there you can figure out that the cooling market, especially for developing economies, where also partly some European countries were here mentioned, will be doubled between now and 2050 from $300 billion to $600 billion. So that's the market where we are looking for kind of technologies and solutions where we are looking here in the cooling down project. And I think that's quite worthwhile really to think how to get a share out of that, especially with kind of technologies which we have recently presented also in the presentation before. And which is much more important is that billions of people are somehow looking worldwide for such kind of new technologies which try to help them to have sustainable cooling solutions, not only from an environmental point of view, but also from a cost point of view at the end, because they are all affected, as Virginie and Isabella were also already saying, from the heat waves and all the other things which are coming from the climate crisis. So we have two drivers. On the one hand, the market shares on cooling, which are increasing rapidly, and on the other hand, the market itself, which really leads us to introduce new technologies based on renewables and to have a share on that. Now, with that, I just want to sum up some exercise which we did in the analysis so far in the financing and business models, trying to tell you already what we have done there and what you can expect also in the future from this final results here in the project at the end. So first of all, the target groups and stakeholders where we have had a close look, especially from the perspective of the cooling down project, where on the energy users, either private or companies, looking of course into the energy costs, because that's something which is somehow stimulating your life later on in different matters. Of course, also the energy providers are part of this story and these target groups where we are looking into. They are, of course, their focus is on the profit, on the amortization, for example, of investments which they want to do in the future, looking also into renewable or sustainable cooling technologies. And one more important driver, I think, also for the future are public bodies, especially if you think about the clean energy transition and so on, which probably allows them also to somehow invent such technologies to larger building stocks where probably private owners or users are not really willing to invest or do not have the money at the end to do that. And that's some of the things where we want to dive in here in the analysis and with new ideas, especially how to get this renewable cooling, sustainable cooling financed at the end. Now, the analysis into different topics led us to collect, of course, different models which are more or less well known. So from profit-oriented financing options to business models, and of course also some social-oriented stuff. So I will not go into deeply in all these different things, but that's something which you can read later on if the deliverable of this subtask here in the web package 4 will be delivered next year. But most important is that we have focused now in this presentation today, first of all, on the ESCO financing model and on the citizen cooperative, just to give you a first idea where we think there are some advantages, especially for renewable cooling technologies, to bring them into the market with the different stakeholder groups which I have introduced to you beforehand, and then to sum up this to a new innovative model, which I will also present in the next few minutes. Now, just to give you a first idea, what are the boundary conditions for the different models, especially now starting with the citizens cooperative and who is involved in this process. I just want to briefly show you this figure. We have on the one hand side the private investor pool, They want to get some cheap energy. They want to participate more, maybe also in the clean energy transition, but they have no know-how on a technical point of view of the technologies themselves. And so that's most important for them to find an operator which is somehow interested to take over this and to look after the technologies, so the renewable cooling technologies, which have to be invested and installed and also maintained, of course, later on. So there are different actors in the field for this citizen cooperative model, which with pros and cons, trying to help to overcome this kind of obstacles to install really such technologies into the market. And of course, if you do investments as a private investor and you give this to an operator, then you're going also want to get some payback. So that's quite important that we have this payments also which is somehow forced by a contract, of course. And so this citizen cooperative model has a quite interesting benefit now, especially for operators, because they have no risks, they have not the upfront on the investment and so on. So that's something which is somehow on the side of the private investors, first of all. So if you just take that with you, because that's important for the new business model which you want to introduce later on, to get known and to remember what this citizen cooperative model looks like. On the other hand, which is also quite interesting and also somehow already realized, we have another model which is an ESCO model. So we have an operator again, we have a company and consumer. Now we have not an investor in that field because the investor is somehow coming from the operator. Now this operator now is installing and maintaining the technology itself, and he gets a payback to the savings, to all the savings. And if you think back about the results from Virginie, that would be really interesting to see how the ESCO model, especially for the two cases in Bucharest and Roma, would look like at the end, especially if you think back about the differences to the conventional technology and the potential savings from the geothermal solution. So we will probably get also some numbers later on to the final results here in that work, because we will use also these numbers from the work done by AFPG. So important for the ESCO model is that especially the consumer is the owner of the technology, but they have no investment to do because that's done by the operator. They get a payment back to the savings, or depending on the contract period, about 10, 12, maybe sometimes more years. This is paid off, and after that, the technology, so all the stuff which was installed on site, will be handed over to the consumer, to the company, and so on. So that's important to know. Now, those are some models, of course, which are already introduced into the market. They are not that used so far in the renewable cooling sector, but that's something, especially for the future, which should be taken into account, thinking back about different stakeholders, which I've talked about beforehand. Now, what we have done now, we tried now to unlock some new opportunities, because if you're analyzing these existing models, the question always comes ahead, why they are not really used that much so far, and if there are some other barriers which probably are somehow hindering to introduce renewable cooling technologies in the future, in the near future. And that's why we made a new development, the so-called initial 8 cashback model. So it's a new model which is somehow more complex, first of all, maybe, but it has 2 aspects which I briefly want to explain to you. So we have again private investors, and there we have an investor pool. And they probably want to spend some money, some investment for such renewable cooling technologies, but again they have not the knowledge again. Therefore, they need an operator, an administrator again, who is willing to do that. And this institution somehow gets the payments, so the investment, and to install again the technology itself on site. So it's again something which is important, and different to the ESCO model is that the operator now owns the technology, and they get somehow kind of credit from this private investor pool. And why they should invest, because that's also different now to the ESCO model, is because they get a discounted energy prices. So the cooling price, the kilowatt hours on cooling are less than for other consumers in that building stock where such a technology will be installed. So they have to pay the standard energy price. So here in the bottom, what you can see here, to get the energy here out of this cooling device and the technology which is installed on site. So that's the difference. And depending on the investment which you are willing to do as a private investor, then it's depending how much, of course, you're spending in this total investment. The rebate on your discounted energy price probably leads to 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, depending, of course, what you're willing to invest. And after that, you have to pay again the standard energy price. But that is something which is probably interesting also for users of building stocks or owners of building stocks, because it allows already to if you rent a flat to get somehow this discounted energy prices to somehow allow also users to get some rebates already in this way. Now, important is to somehow sum up this. We have two kind of clients. We have the ones which are internally doing a payment. They have to, of course, to pay for the monthly rates on cooling and to get the thermal energy back. But this is, as I said before and explained before, somehow with a rebate. On the other end, we have the other clients, customers, and they just have to pay their energy bills and to get the same amount probably of energy out of this cooling technology, like is provided by the operator. So that's somehow the model, how it looks like. Of course, we will do a lot of calculations in the near future. That's something which we will present later on. More important is to get into some discussions also. What are now the advantages and disadvantages of such a model? We did also already some internal workshops on that. That's such a summary. I will not go all of these different topics, but important is, if you're looking into the pros and cons, is that especially on the pro side, it's a quite interesting model, especially for private users. If you're thinking about housing blocks and so on, where it's not that easy to install as a single household probably, or use renting a flat, such technology, but as a group, it's quite flexible somehow. And it also allows landlords and other housing associations to do such investments and to somehow stimulate with that also their pricing on the flats. On the other side, of course, there are some pros and cons. The question will be, of course, how we can somehow define a contract in that way, because that's not done so far, of course. Just we are in initial steps in this development. And the next question is how to generate the energy. Is it only from the renewables? Is there other stuff? What is about the efficiency of the overall system? Who's taking care of that? So there are different open questions still, which we have to answer and to think about. And in that context, to make this webinar more lively, I briefly want to join you now into a Mentimeter open discussion, which means we have prepared 2 questions, which means you can either use your smartphone now and using the QR code, which is here on the bottom left, or you have to open your browser and on menti.com, and then you will ask for a code. It's 14789235. And with that, the first question, of course, what kind of barriers do you see as a participant now of this webinar today for this new IEC model? And there are 2 other questions which I will show you in one of the next slides. But to make this lively, I will try to switch now to the browser. And so I hope you can see the browser now. And with that, if you either go to your browser with menti.com and enter the code 14789235, or you use the QR code, then you can already enter some wording. So the first are coming in. So we will somehow make some notes on that later on. This will be recorded and will be also put into the final slides. So I will leave that open for you for some seconds. As I said before, either open your browser, then it's menti.com. The code you have to put in is 14789235, or you can use again the QR code here on the bottom left side to enter the Mentimeter. So just leave this for some seconds. Of course, you can still put some wording here. Leave that for some more seconds, and then we jump to the next question. So if you have done that, then you will be linked to the next slide. So just waiting for some more responses. Right. I think this is fine. All right, then we go to the next question. Now it's a rating. Thinking back about the things which I've briefly explained about the new ISC model, we wanted to know from your side, what do you think? What is the feasibility of this model? So is it feasible really to do this kind of implementations in real projects? So 1 would be for not at all, and 10, it goes off like a rocket. So you can really crash the market and bring it really to a high level to introduce renewable cooling technologies, either geothermal or solar thermal cooling technologies. And the second question is, what is the future viability of this model? So either no operator will offer this because they are not interested in such a model, or yes, private investors can participate in the clean energy transition. So I will also leave this for a few seconds. Interesting is to see, depending on your rate, between 1 to 10, this is moving now all the time. And of course, finally, we get a final result. And okay, it looks like that you are all already thinking it's somehow interesting. So 60% are in favor of this new model, and the other 40% maybe have to be either bring up their questions later on in the Q&A, or probably joining us in the final event next year to get more results, to get more precise information, to have your chance to give a nice feedback. All right, with that, I will jump
We have
back.
3 more minutes.
Yeah, I jump back to the final slides. So, all right, so this was the Mentimeter. Now, what's the outlook? We have done, of course, already some calculations, some initial ones. There will be more, as I said before. We will also use some data from different best practices collected here in the project. Also the work done, which was presented by AFPG, by Virginie. And the results will be presented at the final event in April in next year in Brussels, in Belgium. And with that, I'm finished also for Q&A now. And thanks for listening. And maybe there are some interesting questions popping up now for the Q&A session in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Julie, for excellent presentation and overview. Here we have, can you see in the chat, there is a list of questions. So
yes.
Maybe we can start from the first one, or the first one, I guess, was for Saverio.
Okay.
How can we ensure we are prioritizing the decarbonization of cooling alongside? But everyone it's an open discussion, so feel free to join.
Yeah, I can quickly say that basically, as I was saying, in the current climate framework, and that's why we want to extend it as well, there are the right provisions. It's just I'm sorry. It's just that indeed we need the implementation. So, for example, we have local heating and cooling plans, but we need to implement them right. We also have in the EED, I didn't mention it, we have comprehensive assessments on efficient heating and cooling, which is a requirement that member states need to comply with to basically have an overview of their actions on heating and cooling. And it's taking some years just to convince them and push member states to actually take action on this, which will also makes it a mistake to think to change the framework now, because basically we would be back to zero after years and years of lobbying and advocacy on this. So there are some provisions. Now the part that we expect is to have these documents that like have a comprehensive approach to heating and cooling. So also the sector can also provide inputs on those. So we have the tools, we just need to implement them right and make them more ambitious.
Thank you very much. So Virginie and Yuli, why is the impact of work productivity so much larger in Bucharest, and how do you translate productivity into euros? From Paul Ramzak also the question, how do you translate mortality into euros?
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for your question. I wanted to answer in the chat, but I couldn't find how to do. I wanted to give you the link to the study and the bibliography we used. It is an Austrian study we found where we have a sort of calculation with entry data. And for example, you have to consider, I just read the methodology. You have to find the number of deaths due to heat in the city. And you also have to compare the number of hot days in the city defined as day with a maximal temperature over 30 degrees with the number of hot days near the city. And you had so different kind of such hypotheses. You have to find this data, and then you have a calculation which gives you the transfer from qualitative aspects to quantitative one, to euro. And I see all your questions are around that, and I understand, because it is it is central in our study to have the possibility to quantify the externality. So I don't know, I can give you the information per email after the webinar, and everything will be explained in the deliverable that will be published during the cooling down project. I don't know when, but I know the deadline of the project will be April next year. So for sure we will have all this material available for public.
Thank you very much, Virginie. Yuli, do you want to further comment on these questions, any of these questions?
Yeah, to be honest, as we were not involved in these 3 cases to do the calculations, I think it's better to have a look into the report that Virginie was mentioning, because I also had to do that. And then, of course, I could probably answer this question, but I think it's a better way to do this in this step.
Thanks a lot. So last question for Saverio. You see from Bruno Della Vedova. Good morning, Bruno.
Yeah, I was typing my answer, but yeah, it's quicker like this. So basically, regarding the local heating and cooling plans, the EU has now set the legal requirement. So let's say the ball is in the court of member states now to transpose it and then support local authorities. But surely what we can see as a role for the EU is to support then the implementation by local authorities, because also we see in different member states sometimes there's also a difficulty for local authorities to access funding at national level, sometimes even for political reasons. So for sure, the EU can jump in when it comes to technical assistance to local authorities, and also access to financial resources from the EU budget to support these local heating and cooling plans.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, we are on time. Very last questions. Okay, so thank you very much. We are strict on 1 hour. So thank you very much for the attendees. Thank you very much for the speakers and for super valuable contributions. I would like also to thank EJEC, the management team, for the organization, for the coordination of cooling down, together with all the work we are carried out together with all the other partners of Cooling Down. So please, maybe you can, Victoria, if you can just show the last slide with the website. Follow all the Cooling Down actions on the website, on the Cooling Down website. And we will continue. This project will end by the end of April, but we will continue to face the cooling issue. So with the goal of scaling it up and to replicate from local to larger scale. So thank you very much. I wish you a good day. Thank you.